냐제 쳔보도 닝미장 돈은 뭐는 쳔보 냐게다 나그라다는 산도 쳔모도 tum바도 제잔라 기숑서 내셔로 저기 장감서 저거 뒤집션로 열라는 지금 반조자라 소라 공주 도반보르 신지로 공주 도반보르 신지로 공주 도반보르 신지로
Profound and subtle Dharma is rarely encountered in eons. Now we hear and follow it. May we realize the Tathagata's meaning. To liberate beings, please generate bodhicitta before teaching.
We continue with the Shurangama Sutra, whether we're teaching the Shurangama Sutra or other sutras. One thing is that everyone should listen attentively when teachings are given. If during this time you fall asleep or move your body around restlessly, or your mind wanders, or while your body is among those listening to the teachings, your mind has already flown away outside, none of this is acceptable. Also, during and after class, everyone should maintain silence. Many of us are the type who simply cannot control our voices, constantly talking without pause. Also, the concept of time. Everyone must have a sense of time, whether it's my class or other classes, including going to work or doing anything. A person must have a sense of time. Having a sense of time is very important, because when we have a sense of time and develop our own values, it becomes very meaningful. For example, when we teach every evening, it's basically 2 hours sometimes. But our current recitation practice basically takes about 40 minutes, with 30 minutes at the beginning and 10 minutes of reciting the King of Aspiration prayers at the end. So I'm thinking, if we don't have class on a particular day, many people probably wouldn't spend 40 minutes in recitation. Think about it yourselves. At most, you might recite the King of Aspiration prayers, at most 20 or 30 minutes. Of course, if you have other practices, that's different, including whether we would recite what we chant daily. So the most important aspect of our liturgical practice is that so many monastics complete it together. So these daily classes are very meaningful. We're not talking about the merit of teaching or listening to the Dharma, but mainly the recitations before and after. We also use prayer wheels. I myself often think, usually when I'm at home reading or reciting, I do use prayer wheels, but honestly not that much. But here, at least in front of others, I recite for 40 minutes while using the prayer wheel for 40 minutes. If we don't have class on a particular day, if I were to ask whether you used a prayer wheel for 40 minutes, I don't know who would have. So sometimes our collective practice like this is indeed very powerful, and the merit is also tremendous. This point everyone should value. And when listening to teachings, you must focus yourself. Otherwise, when one person isn't focused, many people around them become disturbed. Some people simply cannot control their own body and mind, and so they keep adjusting their sitting posture. Their mind also flies here and there. Their entire state is particularly poor. As a result, many people around them are affected, so you must train yourself. Either don't go to the Dharma hall. When any teacher is giving a lecture, don't go listen. If you're going to listen, then you must. Even wild horses can be tamed, so this. Now some animals can become gentle through training, so why can't we become tamed? You must break your old habits. Even if you can't break them, suppress them, and then listen properly. This is what I wanted to say beforehand. Now we're teaching the Shurangama Sutra. The Shurangama Sutra, indeed, I think our teachers, when they teach the Shurangama Sutra in the future, it might be somewhat different from other sutras. For some other sutras, like the Diamond Sutra or Heart Sutra, including the Vimalakirti Sutra and Lotus Sutra, they don't seem particularly difficult to understand. Basically, as long as you have some level of teaching ability, you can manage. But this Shurangama Sutra, without a certain level of understanding, I'm afraid you couldn't even continue teaching it, couldn't manage, you couldn't even convince yourself. Everyone should also make aspirations for the future. Right now, I basically haven't heard anyone teaching the Shurangama Sutra. Everyone knows that throughout the mainland or elsewhere. In the past, as I mentioned before, like Venerable Master Mengchen and Venerable Master H. Suan Hua, including Nan Huaichin, who also taught parts of it, including Master Taishu. They all taught it. But this was probably decades or even 100 years ago. Now, why isn't anyone teaching the Shurangama Sutra? This is something that we all present here, still have some responsibility for this Shurangama Sutra. Everyone should think in their hearts, I must propagate it in the future. Regardless of your age or circumstances, each of us should make such plans or have such aspirations in our hearts, even if you're a lay practitioner. Perhaps in this world, if no one else teaches the Dharma and you're asked to, at that time you can also come forward and teach everyone the Shurangama Sutra. This would be wonderful, because the wisdom in the Shurangama Sutra can be completely accepted by worldly people. If we teach others about emptiness, they might not understand. The 400 verses on the middle way says if someone has doubts about the Buddha's wisdom, teach them emptiness to generate certainty. So to teach emptiness logical analysis like in the Shurangama Sutra is very meaningful. Especially I feel this would be good for Westerners. Westerners generally really love logical reasoning. They really enjoy it. If there's an opportunity to propagate this in the West, I think we should propagate it, including what we're doing now, learning in different languages. Some languages have the Shurangama Sutra, some don't. But regardless, when there's an opportunity in the future, we should propagate it or translate it. It's very necessary to do something in this regard. Actually, it's very necessary for us to do some things now. For example, Master Oyi in the past specially composed a guide to reading the Tripitaka with the guide to reading the Tripitaka. Reading the Tripitaka now is somewhat convenient, but if we could make it even more comprehensive, that would be even better. So now each of us shouldn't think, oh, what pizza should I eat tomorrow? Or what hot pot should I eat tomorrow? What cake should I eat? What this or that? Is there now somewhere else promoting another thing? Let me try this today, tomorrow let me taste that. But it's okay to eat these occasionally. We're all beings of the desire realm, but don't think about what to eat every day. Otherwise, look at our tongue faculty today. Everything you eat, all the sour, sweet, bitter, and spicy have been determined to be empty. If you still crave them, that's particularly foolish. So let me see how this goes. I won't elaborate further, otherwise today's content would be quite extensive. Yesterday we covered among the 12 sense bases, the nose faculty and ear faculty. Ear consciousness and nose consciousness are completed. Previously there was also body consciousness, and the day before we also covered body consciousness. So among eye, ear, nose, tongue, body and mind, today we need to finish the last 3 consciousnesses. That is, tongue consciousness and body consciousness plus mind consciousness. These we can analyze. I see that some of our Dharma friends should have quite good comprehension abilities, and expression abilities are also good. If there's an opportunity in the future to actually teach the Shurangama Sutra, there shouldn't be any major problems. But first, we ourselves should learn well. If we haven't learned well ourselves and teach others, that probably wouldn't be very meaningful. Today we're explaining that tongue consciousness doesn't exist. The Buddha told Ananda, moreover, as you understand it, tongue and taste as conditions give rise to tongue consciousness. Does this consciousness arise from the tongue with tongue as its boundary, or does it arise from taste with taste as its boundary? The reasoning here should be the same as before. The Buddha again told Ananda that you should understand, so the tongue and taste, tongue faculty and taste objects, these 2 conditions mutually conditioning each other finally can produce tongue consciousness. So this tongue consciousness depends on the tongue faculty and arises, finally becomes the boundary of the tongue faculty, the boundary of the tongue, or depends on external taste objects and arises, then becomes the boundary of taste objects. What exactly is it like among the 18 dhatus? The previous methods of investigation are basically the same. But when it comes to the later parts, I feel it's as if the Buddha, for each consciousness, uses different logical reasoning to analyze. It's not all using the same template, if it were templated, because all are consciousnesses arising from faculties and objects. If using one theory as a template, we might understand each Dharma more clearly, but actually it's not like that. So we also know that the Buddha is truly amazing, effortlessly. Any reasoning he can easily, from another angle, then determine it to be empty. In this way, we unknowingly finally see how this consciousness is determined to be empty, but indeed his kind of analysis has no loopholes, is unassailable. can be said to be particularly precise. Using such logical reasoning to analyze is very meaningful. Now everyone knows what tongue consciousness is. We eat every day. For example, yesterday's taste sensations. We also know this taste, that taste, whether it's the fragrant sense before or foul odors, various scents, everyone knows about this. Then today's tongue consciousness. Tongue consciousness is also taste sensation, this kind of awareness of tasting. Everyone should also know this. From eating breakfast in the morning, you also know how my taste sensation is. Then when eating lunch and when eating dinner, plus in between, some people often eat this and that. Some people like to eat sunflower seeds. Eating sunflower seeds in Tibet, it's called cutting virtue roots. Why is it called cutting virtue roots? Because while eating and reciting, a lot gets delayed. Some people give it a new name called cutting virtue roots. Do you eat virtue root cutters or not? It seems our monastics here don't eat them much, but there are also many. Previously, the nuns liked to eat them. But all of these, actually, each of us every day is for the sake of the tongue's sensations. Actually, the tongue is very small, as everyone knows, in relation to our entire body. Yet this sensation on the tongue, everyone values it greatly. There was once a book and also a continuous TV series called A Bite of China. After watching it, it truly was a bite of China. All kinds of things to eat and drink inside. They covered every region they filmed for a very long time. Watching it, on one hand, we see now that every dish is not easy to make, including lotus root, including any food is very difficult for farmers. On the other hand, to satisfy momentary craving, people are particularly lacking in compassion because of the many beings they kill. This is also indirectly revealed here, although it shows everything quite. For example, meat appears in its more appetizing aspect, or the killing is not particularly obvious. But actually we should understand that people are still very pitiful. Just for this taste sensation on the tongue, they create so much negative karma. All of us here may also have created much negative karma for one bite of delicious food. We should all think about this. Actually, if we observe with the wisdom of the Shurangama Sutra, when investigating this so-called delicious, so-called unpalatable, all of these in their essential nature are also unattainable, like dreams and illusions. So how do we analyze this below? Ananda, if this tongue consciousness, tongue awareness arises from the tongue, is produced by the tongue faculty, then all things in the world, sugar cane, dark plums, coptis, rock salt, asarum, ginger and cassia, would all be without taste. He says, if our tongue's consciousness depends on the tongue faculty and arises, if it arises depending on the tongue faculty, then it's produced by the tongue. In this case, in our external world, like sweet sugar cane, sour dark plums, and bitter coptis, salty rock salt. And the rather spicy asarum, ginger cassia, is ginger also spicy? I suppose so. It belongs to this category. Then all of these should have no taste. Why? Because all of this, the tongue certainly tastes their flavors, but the tasting of flavor exists only on the tongue faculty. If it exists only on the tongue faculty, then all the external tastes of sour, sweet, bitter, and spicy should not exist. Everyone should understand this, because its awareness comes from the tongue faculty. If it comes from the tongue faculty, then it has nothing to do with external objects. You taste your own tongue. Is it sweet or bitter? If the tongue's nature is bitter, who tastes the tongue? If you say that this comes from the tongue faculty, taste sensation comes from the tongue faculty, then if you taste your own tongue, since it comes from the tongue faculty, you should know this tongue faculty should be able to taste. When tasting like this, is it ultimately sweet or bitter? If the tongue's nature is bitter, then who tastes the tongue's bitter nature, this bitter essential nature? Everyone should understand this. If you use the tongue to taste, then is this tongue bitter or spicy or sour or sweet? If you, let's suppose, of course the opponent cannot admit this, but among our 6 tastes, one of them If we say this is bitter, then this bitterness. Because your tongue has a bitter nature, then who would taste your tongue? If there's no tasting, how would you know that your tongue's essence is bitter? You cannot know. The tongue does not taste itself. So what constitutes awareness? If the tongue itself, just like we explained before, the eye cannot see itself. If the tongue cannot know or taste itself, then who knows this? Either it's produced within the tongue or the tongue's nature is bitter or sweet. Who would know this? It cannot be known. Such reasoning is actually unreasonable. If we reverse this and say the tongue's nature is not bitter, I just ask, does your tongue have taste? If you say the tongue has no bitter nature, taste does not arise by itself, then taste is actually not produced by the tongue. If the tongue's nature is not bitter, not sweet, not spicy, not sour, then actually you're just talking. This taste is not produced by the tongue itself. If it's not produced by the tongue itself, then consciousness produced by the tongue is called tongue consciousness. How do we establish this tongue consciousness? Among our 18 dhatus, the dhatu of tongue consciousness, how do we establish it? There's no way to establish it. So this is somewhat simpler. The meaning is the tastes we experience. Do they depend on the tongue faculty and arise? Many of us probably think it's not completely dependent on the tongue faculty, but we all feel that it's definitely related to the tongue faculty. Otherwise, you taste with your tongue if the tongue tastes. If nothing at all is produced within the tongue, then it would have nothing to do with the tongue, so you couldn't taste flavor. We might also have such thoughts. So regardless, it's impossible for taste to be produced within the tongue. This is how it's determined. After we make this determination, when we eat later, we can't taste anything. That's a bit troublesome. Many people don't eat at night. Tomorrow they might forget. No problem, right? Producing sour, sweet, bitter, and spicy, depending on the tongue faculty, is impossible. If it arises from taste, we just said it's not produced by the faculty, from objective dust. That is, taste dust produces tongue consciousness. If this tongue consciousness is produced by external objects, consciousness itself becomes taste, same as the tongue faculty. It should not taste itself. How then could consciousness know what is taste and what is not taste? He says here that because tongue consciousness arises from external sour, sweet, bitter, and spicy tastes, if it arises from taste, then consciousness, its very essence, because we just mentioned tongue consciousness. This consciousness must have become taste. Otherwise, it couldn't be produced within one essence. It's impossible to produce. In this case, the tongue has already become taste. Our tongue consciousness that tastes external objects has become taste. If it has become taste, same as the tongue faculty, it should not taste itself. If it has become taste, then just like our tongue faculty cannot taste itself, this taste cannot possibly taste itself if this is the case. How then could consciousness know what is taste and what is not taste? If it cannot taste flavor, how could your tongue consciousness know, oh, this is taste, this is not taste? For example, this is sugar, very sweet. This is chocolate, quite delicious. This is hot and sour noodles. This is spicy tofu. How would you then? Wow, this has no taste at all, no saltiness either. For example, sometimes when we eat tsampa, it might have none of the sour, sweet, bitter, or spicy. In that case, it's a relatively bland taste. If your consciousness has already become taste, taste itself cannot taste itself. In this case, who would taste all these worldly tastes? No one would know. Taste and non-taste couldn't be distinguished. Moreover, all taste, there's more. If our tongue consciousness depends on taste and arises, there are many more faults. What kind of faults? Moreover, all tastes do not arise from one thing. Originally, all our tastes, all the sour, sweet, bitter, and spicy, sour, sweet, bitter, spicy, salty, astringent, etc., all tastes do not arise from one thing. For example, sugar cane or rock salt, they don't arise within one object. Since tastes arise from many sources, these different tastes, so many tastes must arise from many external objects. If this is the case, if these tastes truly exist, then the consciousness that grasps them, that is, tongue consciousness, should also become multiple entities. Consciousness should have multiple bodies. This consciousness should have the fault of becoming multiple entities. If consciousness has one body, that body must arise from taste, salty, bland, sweet, pungent, arising together in combination, various changing aspects, all become one taste. There should be no discrimination. He says here, if you argue the opposite, our consciousness is one entity, not multiple. This consciousness, your tongue consciousness is one. If tongue consciousness is one, then you must admit that this unified consciousness arises from objective taste. Because in this section, everything arises from objective taste. If it arises from objective taste, because taste dust is also one, and the consciousness it produces is also one. In this case, your external objects of salty, bland, sweet, pungent, these arise in combination, and each of them has its own inherent characteristic arising together. For example, sugar cane is inherently sweet. This kind of arising and various changing aspects, probably various transformations, like sweet and sour together, or spicy and salty, spicy and numbing. Spicy and numbing are bitter and spicy together. In this way, there are some more transforming aspects. One is combined aspects and inherent aspects, and transforming aspects all become one taste. There should be no need to distinguish if your consciousness is also unified, and this tongue consciousness arises from external objects, arising from external taste dust. If it arises from external taste dust, one consciousness should arise from one external object, in this case with all kinds of such combinations of sour, sweet, bitter, and spicy, and sour, sweet, bitter, spicy arising inherently, and sour, sweet, bitter, spicy through combination, becoming originally this kind of taste, but now becoming that kind of taste. Actually, every being truly has different habits and karma. Some people have liked spicy food since childhood. Some have liked sweet food since childhood, even when their teeth are all gone. They still want to eat sweet things, right? Actually, many people particularly value this taste sensation on the tiny tongue. If you think it truly arises from external objects, then one object produces one consciousness. If there's one consciousness, then conversely, its objects. Various kinds of objects would all become one, no way to distinguish. If discrimination is absent, then it cannot be called consciousness. If these cannot be distinguished, then it cannot be established as consciousness, cannot be established as tongue consciousness. If you can't distinguish at all, like sour, sweet, bitter, spicy, if you can't distinguish any of them, then tongue consciousness should definitely be able to distinguish. If you cannot distinguish, then you cannot be called consciousness. How then could it be called the tongue taste consciousness dhatu? In this case, how could you name it as what? The tongue consciousness that the tongue faculty uses to taste flavors. How do you establish this dhatu? There's no way. Because you haven't tasted the external flavors. If you haven't tasted any external flavors, how could you have any tongue sensation? It shouldn't exist. This is the second aspect. We just used that. Does this tongue consciousness arise from the faculty, or from taste, or from objects? Arising from objects has already been refuted. So the third one, arising from empty space. It's not in the brief explanation above, but here they added arising from space. It should not arise from empty space to produce your mind consciousness. Of course, apart from faculty and objects, if you say this taste sensation, this tongue consciousness, arises from empty space, that's impossible. Apart from external objects and faculties, it's impossible to arise from the space in between. It seems Master Yuanying explained, because empty space is without knowledge, how could tongue consciousness arise from the unknowing? The unknowing is unconditioned Dharma, space is unconditioned Dharma. How could unconditioned Dharma suddenly produce consciousness? It's impossible to produce. This is the third aspect. The following part refutes combination. Refuting combination means tongue and taste combining. The combination of tongue faculty and taste dust just mentioned, right there in the middle there is originally no self-nature. This refutation is the same as before. How is the refutation? Because taste dust and tongue faculty, if they actually combine, also cannot produce consciousness. If consciousness is produced, this consciousness would have a part close to taste dust and a part close to the tongue faculty, one part belonging to the body, one part not belonging to the body. This consciousness would become two. That's impossible. So it has no such nature in the middle. It's impossible to have such nature. In this case, how could a dhatu arise? How could the dhatu of your tongue consciousness arise? There's no way to produce it. Master Hanshen said that our previous arising from the faculty mainly refutes self-arising, then arising from taste refutes other arising, then arising from empty space refutes causeless arising, then faculty and taste jointly producing. If arising from combination, this refutes joint arising. The refutation of four arisings discussed in the Mulamadhyamaka Karika. Dharmas do not arise from themselves, nor do they arise from others, not from combination, not without cause, therefore no, there is no arising. The Mulamadhyamaka Karika mainly discusses four arisings. Dharmas do not self-arise, nor do they arise from others, not joint arising and not causeless arising, therefore no, there is no arising. This reasoning, some teachers here also, can determine through the four arisings that all dharmas have no inherent nature. Therefore you should know that tongue and taste as conditions give rise to tongue consciousness dhatu. All three places are empty. So same as before, we should understand what should we understand? The consciousness arising from tongue faculty and taste dust as conditions. The tongue consciousness that arises, all three places are empty. Then tongue, taste and tongue dhatu, these three. Here he mentions tongue faculty, then taste dust, tongue dhatu. Here it's written as tongue dhatu. Sometimes from the perspective of objects we discussed before, tongue dhatu means tongue consciousness dhatu. Yesterday I didn't think of one principle from the treasury of valid reasoning. Why can both faculty and object produce it, but when we name it, only the faculty is used? For example, eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness. They don't say form consciousness, feeling consciousness, perception consciousness. The reason is some dharmas depend on uncommon conditions. For example, when we beat a drum, originally this drum, the sound produced depending on the drum and the drumstick and hands, many conditions, but here it can be called drum sound. We don't say hand sound or drumstick sound. The reason is the same here. So what he mentions here as tongue dhatu, these three are fundamentally neither conditioned nor naturally existent. This is what we've covered. Now among the 18 dhatus, there should be 12 dhatus, 6 more dhatus remain, 12 dhatus, right? Now let's discuss body consciousness again. Body consciousness dhatu, body faculty dhatu, and tactile object dhatu. We'll analyze these three dhatus together. The Buddha again told Ananda, moreover, as you understand it, body and touch as conditions give rise to body consciousness. This is the same as before, Ananda, you should understand. The body and external tactile objects, these serve as conditions producing your body consciousness. Does this consciousness arise from the body with body as its boundary, or does it arise from touch with touch as its boundary? This is also the same, your body consciousness. Depends on the body faculty and arises, finally becoming the body dhatu, or depends on tactile objects and arises, then becomes the tactile dhatu. What exactly is it? Then the Buddha again told Ananda, if it arises from the body, there must be no conditions of separation and contact for dual awareness. What would the body recognize? This analysis is not very extensive. He says here, if you say body consciousness, the body's awareness depends on the body and arises from the body faculty. If it depends on the body faculty and arises, what fault would there be? Then there would definitely be no conditions of separation and contact for dual awareness. The meaning is among the tactile dharmas, our body generally contacts. Cold, hot, separation, contact. We discussed many tactile dharmas before. These tactile sensations, if they depend on the body and arise, they definitely wouldn't need the tactile sensations brought by separation and contact, the awareness of separation and the awareness of contact. Such awareness wouldn't be needed. If not needed, what would the body recognize? How would the body become the object of consciousness? Because the body consciousness arising from the body faculty must be a kind of awareness arising from the body, and the body becomes an object of consciousness. But if its object of touch is no longer needed, only depending on the body, if arising from the body alone, how could this kind of awareness of body consciousness arise? It's impossible to arise. In this case, the dhatu of body consciousness cannot be established. Here there's only one section, arising from the body faculty, is explained quite simply. Then the second refutation: if, depending on touch, the tactile objects external to the body, if arising from tactile objects, there must be no body, who without a body knows contact and separation. What he's saying here is, if body consciousness doesn't arise depending on the body, but depends on external tactile dharmas, separation, contact, cold, hot, these tactile dharmas to arise, then because the body's awareness depends on tactile dharmas and arises, you yourself shouldn't have a body anymore, because the sensation of bodily awareness originally comes from the body, but if it arises from external cold and warmth, or from separation and contact, then it definitely has nothing to do with your body. But actually, who without a body knows contact and separation? But in this world, where is there one who is not a body, yet knows separation and contact with objects? This is impossible. So if you completely abandon this body, and body consciousness arises depending on external objects, this is actually unreasonable. So above, in the body consciousness discussion just now, first arising depending on the body was refuted. Arising depending on touch was also refuted. Below is refuting arising from combination body and external objects, namely touch. These two combining to arise is also unreasonable. Below, yesterday when we were teaching, I wasn't very satisfied with my explanation, but later I listened. When you were discussing below, some people still understood. So sometimes with the Shurangama Sutra, it seems completely clear when you first read it. Sometimes while teaching, you forget if I don't teach it well myself. When people below teach, actually you should first look at the commentaries. You should be able to teach better than me. My classical Chinese is poor, and my Chinese level is poor in Tibetan. The Tibetan translation is still acceptable, but sometimes the Tibetan is a bit different. Its logical analysis is somewhat different, but it's also acceptable. The following part is a bit more difficult. Next, we discuss refuting combination below. We just refuted arising from the body, refuted arising from external touch. Then these two combining also cannot be established. How is it not established? It says, Ananda, objects do not know touch, but the body knows there is touch. Then the Buddha told Ananda, actually any object, external objects, from the object's own perspective, whether it's cold or contact or separation, any tactile dharmas that are objects of the body, they have no awareness. Objects do not know touch. In this case, what has awareness? After arising in the body knows there is touch. The body has tactile sensation. Everyone knows this. When we touch anything, possibly external, like when your body touches a table or something, the table doesn't necessarily have tactile sensation, but your body still has awareness. Knowing body is touch, knowing touch is body. There are several ways to interpret this. One interpretation is like this. If we admit that body consciousness, bodily awareness, depends on external tactile dharmas and arises, if it arises from external tactile dharmas, then this bodily awareness, because the bodily awareness just mentioned, depends on tactile dharmas and arises. If depending on tactile dharmas and arising, knowing body is touch, then your body consciousness or bodily awareness should become touch. Actually, this cannot become touch. Otherwise, touch is external object. It can be called inanimate dharma, but if this appears in several commentaries also explained this way, including Zixuan explained this way inside, if body consciousness depends on external objects and arises, then your knowing body should become touch, and knowing touch also becomes body, because body consciousness arises from touch, just mentioned. This consciousness arising from touch should also become body. Actually, this cannot be admitted if body becomes touch and touch becomes body. Everything is confused, already chaotic. Actually, separating object and subject is actually unreasonable. This means if body consciousness arises from external objects, there is this fault. Touch itself is not body, body itself is not touch. If we speak from one perspective, actually touch is not body, because touch is tactile dust, external objects. Body is internal material faculty. So actually speaking truly, from their own aspects, touch is not body, body is not touch. This reasoning is the same, because body is body faculty. Touch actually is tactile dust, not body faculty. Body and touch, these two aspects originally have no location. So body and touch, these two cannot possibly have a common or combine such a location, because among the 12 sense bases we also discussed, it has no location. If it has no location, the consciousness produced by body and touch is even more impossible. So joined to body, it becomes the body's own nature. Separated from body, it is like the aspect of empty space. Joined to body, it becomes the body's own nature. Separated from body, it is like the aspect of empty space. How is this explained? It says if this is the case, it's definitely unreasonable, because touch and body become what? Finally, if this is the case, then touch and body have already become the body's nature, if this were established. What we mentioned before was depending on, but some sources say this is what we just said depends on external objects and arises, but some commentaries say this refutes combination. But looking here, it doesn't seem necessarily to be refuting combination. This is still discussing external objects. Maybe that's better. Regardless, touch and body, some subjects are missing. You have to understand this yourself. If depending on external objects and arising, then touch and body combine together. In this case, it becomes the body's nature, and separated from the body, then touch becomes the nature of empty space. Because we just said it arises from external objects, but it's unified with the body. If separated from the body, then it becomes the aspect of empty space. In this case, internal and external do not exist. How can the middle be established? Internal and external, now internal body dust and external tactile dust, cannot be established. How could there be a so-called body consciousness in the middle? It's impossible to establish. The middle cannot be established again. If the middle body consciousness cannot be re-established, then internal and external also become empty. Then from what would your consciousness arise to establish a dhatu? In this case, Ananda, your body consciousness. Ananda, your body's consciousness dhatu. From where would it be established? This consciousness dhatu, body consciousness dhatu, how could it be established? There's no way to establish it. This refutes arising from combination. Therefore, you should know body and touch as conditions give rise to body consciousness dhatu. All three places are empty, same as before. So body and touch as conditions. The consciousness dhatu produced by body and touch, all three places are empty. Then body, touch and body dhatu, these three. In this case, body, touch and body consciousness. These three are fundamentally neither conditioned nor naturally existent. Now let's discuss mind consciousness. Look, bodily awareness is also gone. Tongue awareness is also gone. All are manifestations of the Tathagata Garbha's luminous, wondrous function. Apart from this, there's nothing else. I don't know if you understand. Theoretically, this is indeed the case. Below, we begin discussing mind consciousness arising from the mind faculty. So this mind consciousness, body consciousness arising from body faculty, or body consciousness arising from touch, these three also don't exist. Also just a wondrous power. Now we investigate the last three dhatus among the 18 dhatus. So the last three dhatus, the Buddha again told Ananda, moreover, as you understand it, mind and dharmas as conditions give rise to mind consciousness. Does this consciousness arise from mind, with mind as its boundary, or does it arise from dharmas, with dharmas as its boundary? Same as before, Ananda, you should understand the so-called mind and dharmas, mind faculty and dharma objects, serving as conditions produce your mind consciousness. So this mind consciousness depends on the mind faculty and arises becoming the mind dhatu, or depends on dharma objects and arises becoming the dharma dhatu. This is how it's asked. Then the Buddha again told Ananda, if it arises from mind within your mind. There must be something thought to manifest your mind, he says. Below is the first point. This is also broken down into several aspects for refutation. First, using the principle of the existence and non-existence of faculty and objects to refute. Refuting through comparison between faculty and dharmas. First, Ananda, you say if your mind consciousness, everyone knows this. Generally, when we study logic and Abhidharma, the five sense consciousnesses are easier to understand. They depend on bodily material faculties, but mind consciousness has no material form. The Abhidharma also explains, because the mind faculty has no shape or color, it's a kind of mental consciousness, so it is. Generally, when we debate or write articles, mind consciousness is very subtle, it has great depth. So generally compared to the five sense consciousnesses, mind consciousness is harder to understand. Of course, if we further explore mind consciousness, it becomes alaya consciousness, then becomes dharmadhatu. So the mind faculty is relatively more difficult to understand, but here it seems acceptable, not that difficult to understand. So he says here, your mind consciousness among the six consciousnesses. If it depends on the mind faculty and arises, then what are you thinking in your mind? Within your mind, there must be something thought to manifest your mind. Within your mind, a kind of thinking must arise, and with this thinking manifest or prove that you have a mind faculty. As mentioned before, if your mind consciousness depends on the faculty and arises, then within this mind of yours, a kind of thinking must arise. Then depending on this thinking, to prove you have a mind faculty, this speaks from the faculty aspect. If there are no preceding dharmas, mind has no arising. Apart from conditions without form, what use would consciousness have? Below speaks from the perspective of objects. If the objects of your mind faculty, dharma objects, if there are no dharma objects before your mind faculty, then your mind has no way, because we just said it arises from the mind faculty. In this case, your mind has no way, because the dharmas it apprehends before must exist. If the dharmas it apprehends before don't exist, your mind faculty cannot arise in this case, apart from conditions without form, separated from dharma objects without anything to apprehend. Then there are no characteristics at all. Without any characteristics, what function would this mind consciousness serve? Fundamentally, it cannot function. It has no function at all. So first, if it depends on the mind faculty and arises, there is this kind of fault. Then continuing the analysis, moreover, your consciousness, together with various thinking and discriminating natures, are they the same or different? He continues analyzing below Ananda this consciousness of yours, this mind consciousness of yours. Actually, this consciousness, some commentaries interpret it as the eighth consciousness. This consciousness mind is the eighth consciousness. Various thinking is the seventh consciousness. Discriminating nature is the sixth consciousness. The meaning is your eighth consciousness and seventh consciousness, or the discriminating sixth mind consciousness. Are these three ultimately the same or different? This is how it's asked. Some commentaries say, it seems in Wenling Jiwan's commentary, it says, thinking and discriminating are the mind faculty. Thinking and discriminating. Isn't there thinking here? Along with discriminating, this is the mind faculty. But this is somewhat different from our Abhidharma explanation, a little bit different. According to the Abhidharma, generally, the mind faculty is the state after the first six consciousnesses have ceased. We call the mind faculty. Actually, in Han Buddhism, sometimes they also say the shadow of the fallen five objects. the shadow of the 5 objects that have already disappeared is called the mind faculty. There's also this explanation. If this is the case, it seems the mind faculty doesn't necessarily have this kind of discriminating mind completely, but what he's saying here is your mind consciousness and your mind faculty. If we want to understand it more easily, your mind consciousness and mind faculty, are they ultimately of the same essence or different essences? This is how it's asked. If the same as mind, then it is mind. How could it be produced? If you say your mind consciousness and your mind faculty are of the same essence, the same mind, then mind and consciousness become one entity. How could it arise? Because within one entity it's impossible, it cannot produce itself. So how could it be produced? Your mind consciousness arising from the mind faculty is unreasonable. If mind were different, not the same, if you say mind consciousness and mind faculty are different. If different, there should be nothing to be conscious of. If different, one has the nature of consciousness. One doesn't have the nature of consciousness. In this case, your mind consciousness has no object of consciousness, or your mind faculty has no object of consciousness. This definitely won't work. If there's nothing to be conscious of, how could mind arise? If you have no consciousness, how could it arise from the mind faculty? If it arises from the mind faculty, there must be consciousness. Without consciousness, how could it arise? If there is something to be conscious of, how do you distinguish consciousness from mind? If you say there is something to be conscious of, how can you say consciousness and mind are of different essence? Didn't you say they were of different essence before? Why do you speak of different essence this way? Only sameness and difference. Neither of these two natures can be established, so how can a dhatu be established? So whether it's only sameness or difference, mind consciousness and mind faculty, these two, actually neither sameness nor difference can be established, meaning whether sameness or difference, neither of these two natures can be established, because we just refuted them. Above mind faculty and mind consciousness, being the same essence also cannot be established. If the same essence, then one entity. If one entity, it cannot produce itself. If you say mind faculty and mind consciousness are of different essence, then one of them is not an object of consciousness. In this case, they are completely different natures. How could they mutually produce each other? In this case, how can a dhatu be established? The dhatu of the mind faculty and the dhatu of external dharma objects and the dhatu of the mind consciousness they produce, how can they be established? All three cannot be established. Above was about depending on the mind faculty and arising being unreasonable. Then below, depending on Dharma objects and arising is also unreasonable. If it depends on Dharma objects and arises, I think the Dharmas here, the refutation seems a bit different. I don't know if you remember Dharma objects in the Abhidharma. I remember the Dharmas in Gateway to Knowledge include feeling, formations, and perception among the 5 aggregates, and non-associated formations and non-manifest form, and unconditioned Dharmas. These are all Dharmas that are objects of the mind faculty. For example, pain in my hand, or happiness, suffering. These are also objects of the mind faculty, and non-associated formations like arising and ceasing. These are also objects of the mind faculty. Dharmas and formations are also objects of the mind faculty, and unconditioned dharmas, non-manifest form, these are all objects of the mind faculty. So when discussing dharma objects, actually here it says depending on dharmas and arising. If arising from dharmas that are objects of the mind faculty, what's here seems somewhat different from the Abhidharma and Gateway to Knowledge. Actually, in our Tibetan logic, earlier and later logic traditions are easier to understand, like Dignaga and Dharmakirti are easier to understand. But before this, like the logic text that King Trisong Detsen composed, but these terminologies are indeed somewhat difficult to understand. So our Shurangama Sutra should have also been translated quite early. Perhaps some of the ways Dharma characteristics are established inside may not be the same as some explanations in Mahayana and Hinayana. Abhidharma may not necessarily be the same. The Dharma objects here it says, all worldly Dharmas do not depart from the 5 objects. All worldly dharmas actually do not depart from form, sound, smell, taste, touch. These dharmas, you observe observe form dharmas, various sound dharmas, smell dharmas, taste dharmas, and touch dharmas with distinct characteristics, corresponding to the 5 faculties not encompassed by mind. What he's saying here is, all worldly dharmas do not depart from the 5 objects. You, Ananda, should carefully observe. Observe what? Observe form dharmas, observe sound dharmas, observe smell dharmas, observe taste dharmas, observe touch dharmas, objects of eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, that is, these dharmas of form, sound, smell, taste, touch. These dharmas actually have very distinct characteristics. Form objects are definitely not sound objects. Sound objects are definitely not taste objects. Taste objects are definitely not smell objects. Smell objects are definitely not touch objects. The boundaries between them are very distinct. So these corresponding to the 5 faculties. They are objects of the 5 faculties, that is, form dharmas corresponding to the eye faculty, sounds corresponding to the ear faculty, like this. These are not encompassed by mind. They are not objects of the mind faculty. So you see, before the mind consciousness, thinking of form dharmas, pleasant sounds, these here are not objects of the mind faculty, not objects of mind consciousness, because these are objects of the 5 faculties just mentioned, created again by discriminating thoughts. So what are the objects of the mind faculty here? If your consciousness definitely depends on dharmas and arises, if you insist on believing mind consciousness must depend on dharmas and arise, now you should carefully observe what is the state of dharmas. You should now carefully observe what is the state of dharmas. He says these dharma objects. What kind of state are the dharma objects in? What kind of form? In Tibetan it says dharmas means various dharmas. What is the condition of various dharmas? Dharmas is translated as various dharmas, right? The meaning is these are not objects of the mind faculty. Just now there were fixed objects. These are not objects of the mind faculty. So what are the objects of the mind faculty? He says here, use wisdom to observe what exactly do the dharmas that are objects of your mind faculty refer to. If apart from form and emptiness, movement and stillness, openness and blockage, contact and separation, arising and ceasing, beyond all these characteristics, there is ultimately nothing to be obtained if you depart from form and emptiness and movement and stillness of sound objects and openness and blockage of nose faculty objects just mentioned, contact and separation of body objects. Then arising and ceasing are objects of what? Should be objects of the mind faculty. Arising and ceasing as objects of the mind faculty should be non-associated formations. Are there arising among non-associated formations? Arising and ceasing should exist, right? This process, special states of sentient and non-sentient dharmas are called non-associated formations, probably arising and ceasing. Apart from the objects of form, sound, smell, taste, touch, just mentioned, and dharma objects. Beyond the objects of form, sound, smell, taste, touch, and dharmas, the meaning is that so-called dharma objects ultimately cannot be obtained. Ultimately nothing to be obtained. Why is this said? Below probably takes arising and ceasing. Here dharma objects of mind consciousness. Regarding dharma objects, here arising and ceasing. In this case, here arising. When there is arising, then form, emptiness, and all dharmas arise. So-called arising actually means in manifestation, whether form or emptiness. These manifesting dharmas are called arising and ceasing. When there is ceasing, then form, emptiness, and all dharmas cease. Form and emptiness dharmas, this is their process. Their changing process is called arising and ceasing. Apart from this, the arising and ceasing of dharma emptiness. It has no separate inherent nature. If there truly existed a dharma that is object of the mind faculty, that would be acceptable. But among so many, if you take arising and ceasing to examine, Actually, arising is the manifestation of form dharmas and emptiness dharmas. This is called arising. Apart from manifestation, there's nothing else true, arising and ceasing, objects of our consciousness. This dharma is arising, dharma is ceasing, but arising and ceasing. Apart from changes in dharmas, do they exist separately? They don't, since the cause is non-existent. The arising and ceasing just mentioned don't exist, if non-existent. Due to arising, there is consciousness. What form would it take? If arising and ceasing don't truly exist, how could due to arising there is consciousness be produced? You just said due to arising there is consciousness. If due to arising there is consciousness, actually so-called arising, apart from Dharma objects, doesn't exist. Dharma objects were also refuted in the 10,000 Dharmas before, have already been refuted, also have no characteristics. Characteristics are non-existent, since characteristics don't exist. Then depending on the mind faculty and external Dharma objects, the consciousness dhatu that is produced, how could it arise? It doesn't exist. How can a dhatu arise? Therefore you should know. We've already passed through. Good. A driver with poor skills, the road is very bad, driving along inside. Finally, when we reach, therefore you should know, it's relaxing. Therefore you should know mind and dharmas as conditions. Give rise to mind consciousness dhatu. All three places are empty. So we should understand mind consciousness dhatu, arising with mind faculty and dharma objects as conditions. All three places are empty, whether from the dharma aspect, mind aspect, or observing consciousness from its own essence. It also doesn't exist, because this kind of arising from conditions actually also doesn't exist. Dharmas arising from various causes and conditions, I say, are empty. This should be from the Mula Madhyama Kakarika, also called conventional names, also the meaning of the middle way. So as long as they arise from conditions, finally there cannot be a truly produced mind consciousness dhatu. In this case, then mind dharmas and mind dhatu, these three, mind faculty, dharma objects, and mind consciousness dhatu, these three are fundamentally neither conditioned nor naturally existent. Okay.
Sonandai Tamsa Tobaya Tonani Jana Pasi Jirgana Jirano Chubai Jupun Sonen Droja
Bandangara Badna Sodargye Bandangara Badna Sodargye Bandangara Badna Sodargye